Chapter 30. Dead. We slept that night in a woodcutter's shed. In the morning we talked over our plans. We would continue heading southwest. Wilsberg, my hometown, was in that general direction. So too was Switzerland, as well as the advancing troops of the Americans. "We'll make it," I told Tamara. "Of course we will, X." It was early autumn, in the waning days of October. The elm, beech, and oak trees had already begun to drop their leaves, which crunched softly underfoot as we hurried along. The woods provided a degree of concealment and safety. We kept to them as long as possible. But the trees thinned, then they were behind us, and we found ourselves on open road winding through farm country. There were other refugees, but only a few. Most were grim-faced and silent. A boy passed us on a bicycle, the tires of which were stuffed with grass. For a time we walked amidst a curious threesome. A humpbacked old man was pushing a baby carriage. In it, blue legs hanging over the sides, was an old woman, probably his wife. "I have rheumatism," the elderly lady told us. "I can't walk." Alongside them, hands stuffed in his pockets, shuffled a teenage boy. "Why don't you just leave us alone?" he snapped. "Get away from us." Perhaps an hour later, we became aware of the delicious aroma of cooking meat. Our noses and the babble of voices quickly led us to the source. Around a bend in the road was a horse-drawn wagon, but the harness lay empty on the ground. The horse had been killed and cut up into steaks, now cooking on open fires around each of which several people had gathered. "There's more than enough for everyone," said a tall man. "Take what you want, otherwise it'll just go bad." Tamara and I ate ravenously. It had been days since we had eaten our fill, and neither of us could remember the last time we had meat, except a little fish or pork in a thin soup. After thanking the man, feeling stuffed, we continued on our way. We passed the bombed remains of what had been a large military training camp. About all that remained intact were wire fencing and a sign over a large gateway that in German read, "Victory forever." Nearby was a fresh graveyard. I translated the sign for Tamara. "If victory is death," I added, "then we've won." We hurried off. About half an hour later, a misty rain began to fall. At first we ignored it, but soon we were getting soaked. We looked around for cover. There was none. Finally, we saw a village looming ahead, and were sure it was our salvation. But as we approached the place, we heard gunfire, and then the crumph of explosions. Wanting no part of the bloodletting going on there, we headed across an open field. Scattered across it was the wreckage of an American bomber. Only the tail section was still in one piece. Tamara and I crawled in and sat there, waiting for the rain to stop. It didn't. Instead, it only came down harder, pinging overhead on the tinny metal and blowing into our faces through the jagged opening. It began to grow dark. Our cold, damp clothes glued to our bodies, shivering, hugging one another for warmth, we spent a miserable night. The morning wasn't much better. It had stopped raining, but it was cold and dreary, and the field we were in had turned into a shallow, muddy lake. In water, sometimes up to our knees, we slogged along for what seemed an eternity. Finally, we reached higher ground. A feeble autumn sun came out. A cold breeze began to blow. Ahead, near the charred skeleton of a barn, we spotted an apple tree. Hurrying to it, we found a single apple on a high branch. As Tamara and I shared it, I remembered a freckled-faced boy, a friend from what seemed a past life. Jacob. I could hear his voice. "My father is an apple dealer. Our apples are shipped all over Germany." "What are you thinking about?" asked Tamara. I told her about Jacob, about the troop train, and about how his father was an apple dealer. "I don't know what happened to him, whether he lived or died," I said. "I hope he survived." "So do I," said Tamara. A thought turned my lips into a wry smile. "What?" I asked facetiously. "A Russian caring about a German?" "It just so happens that I am in love with a German," she replied with mock adamance. Tamara and I found a few overripe potatoes. We stuffed our pockets with them, and soon were on our way again. High overhead, endless clouds passed, looking like dirty rags being dragged across the sky. The sun went on and off, bathing us in sunlight one moment, in cold shadows the next. And then there was only shadow. Big, heavy, sloppy raindrops began to fall. I thought I heard artillery fire, but then realized it was the rumble of thunder. A spiderwork of electricity danced in the distance. Silver pins of electricity played across the underside of the cloud cover, then flickered out as the feeble pattering of rain rapidly gained momentum. Soon we were being battered by another downpour, wind-driven rain flying almost horizontally into our backs, pushing us along. The road became a quagmire. Rain danced on its hood. A black Mercedes passed us, its wheels looking like revolving balls of mud. "Stop!" I yelled at the driver, who appeared to be the only occupant. "Give us a ride, please." The car kept going. Ahead we spotted an umbrella, red, fully open and oversized. It was balanced in the branches of a tree beside the road. We hurried to it, momentarily under the impression that by some peculiar stroke of luck, just the thing we needed had somehow been left for us. This silly notion was quickly dispelled. Crouching together under the umbrella was a young woman and a little boy. Though wrapped in a blanket, the two were shivering terribly, and looked even worse off than us. We gave them 2 potatoes. The little boy stared at his as though he had never seen one before. The woman smiled wanly. "Danke schön," she said, then whispered something into her little boy's ear. He smiled brightly. "Danke schön," he piped in a babyish voice, echoing his mother and obeying her whispered request to say thank you. We saw no one else before reaching the town. The place took us by surprise. Night had long since fallen, and most of the time we'd been walking with our heads down, as if in surrender to the rain. One moment we were tromping forlornly through muck, our feet heavy with mud. The next we were on a paved highway, the black against black skyline of a town looming ahead. "Thank God," Tamara, her wet hair plastered down against her head and face, squeezed my hand. Gathering our energy, we quickened our pace. The leather sole of my left shoe started coming loose, and soon was flapping against the pavement. The town was a strange-looking place, an odd mixture of modern and medieval buildings, ancient church spires mingling with factory chimneys, derricks and billboards. All was quiet, and in the dark and rain the place gave the impression of being deserted. As with other towns, some sections seemed relatively untouched, while others had been shattered into slabs of broken concrete by bombing raids. "Which way?" asked Tamara, her teeth chattering. I shrugged wet shoulders and then led the way, not having the slightest idea as to where I was going. We made our way along cobblestone streets, the only sounds the wet crunch of our footsteps and the flapping of my left shoe. Though through drifting curtains of fog and rain, we spotted a small hotel. From the outside it looked in good shape, but as we pushed our way inside, we found that, beyond the front wall, hardly anything remained of the place. What had once been the lobby now consisted of busted chairs and other junk floating in a huge water-filled crater. Above what was left of the registration desk hung a banister from which broken spindles dangled. Out in the rain again, one street over, we came to a bleak row of storefronts. Among them was what was left of a barber shop. Entering the place, I almost jumped out of my skin. Coming towards me was a man. I stopped. He stopped, and I realized I was looking at my own dark reflection in a remnant of a wall mirror. I turned, and taking another step, stumbled over a body, that of a German officer lying face down between 2 barber chairs. "Dead," said Tamara, feeling for a pulse. We took from the body only what we could use, items we desperately needed. Still, I had the disturbing feeling I was robbing one of my fellow soldiers. I pulled off his heavy gray-green coat, then helped Tamara into it. The thing engulfed her. A pistol lay nearby. I wanted no part of it. But I took the dead man's boots and wool shirt. I began to worry. The officer, who had been killed by a wound to the side of the neck, was still relatively warm. By the looks of him, he hasn't been dead long, I told Tamara. There's been fighting in this part of town, and not very long ago. We should get out of here. She nodded. I looked out into the street through a little waterfall pouring off the doorway awning. All was dark and still. Bundling up as best we could, we picked our way along the cobblestone street through the sodden, dead-looking town. A hand touched my shoulder. "Look," whispered Tamara. In a nearby building, a light glowed eerily in a window, then suddenly went off. Tamara turned to me, a questioning look in her eyes. "Something's wrong," I said softly. We backed away, then headed up a winding side street, nervous, moving slowly and warily. At first I wasn't sure what I was hearing. I held up a hand. Tamara stopped. Over the gurgling of water flowing down a gutter came the sound of muted, small voices. A hiss for quiet. The voices abruptly stopped. In the same instant, I stared, paralyzed by fear. In the ruins of a storefront, I saw movement and saw a helmeted form in silhouette behind the black, wet barrel of a machine gun. "Ach nein!" I gasped. All changed to slow motion. Tamara, a short distance ahead of me, was turning. I reached out my left hand for her as the black of night was speared red with machine gun fire. Tamara shrieked as she was knocked backward and away from me. My arm and face exploded with pain. Screaming, blood spilling from my mouth, I stumbled forward a step, then fell. "Cease fire!" someone yelled, in English. In agony, I struggled to my knees. The machine gun was silent. Dark forms were coming toward me. I felt a pair of hands search me for weapons, and another hand come to rest on my shoulder. "Hang in there, buddy," said someone in the tough, strangely accented English I had heard in American movies. "They're just kids, civilians," said someone else. "Damn it!" The barrel of a rifle pointed at me was lowered. A soldier, an American flag insignia on one shoulder, frowned grimly. The left side of my face hurt horribly, and I was having trouble seeing out of my left eye. I tried to reach up to touch the eye, but found that for some reason I couldn't. "Pull back," a soldier ordered, getting to his feet. "Get him out of the street." A shock wave of horror hit me. I slowly turned. A short distance behind me lay a coat-covered bundle. Tamara. "Dead," said someone. I tried to cry out. It was impossible. My mouth was full of blood. I started to gag as I opened it. "You heard the lieutenant," said a soldier, looking around apprehensively, rifle in hand. "Pull back, now!" A hulking helmeted silhouette went slowly past, a coat-bundled form in his arms. I spat blood. My words were garbled, but I managed to say the only thing that mattered. "Tamara!" I shrieked.